I had not seen my mother in 18 years until she walked into my uncle's conference room in a designer coat. She did not ask how I survived at 16. She simply asked where the money was. Then the lawyer opened the will, and her smile cracked because my uncle did not just leave an inheritance. He left a trap. What she did not know was that he had documented her worst secret and timed the truth like a bomb. My name is Morgan Allen, and for the last 18 years, I had convinced myself that the woman sitting across from me did not exist. I had buried the memory of her under layers of work, routine, and the impenetrable armor my uncle had helped me build. But now, she was sitting less than 4 feet away, occupying a high-backed leather chair in a conference room in Ravenport, Massachusetts. Her hair was a perfectly coiffed shade of blonde that screamed maintenance, and her skin was smooth, tight, and glowing with the kind of health that only money can buy. She was wearing a designer coat that likely cost $5,000, draped over her shoulders with casual elegance. There was zero shame in her eyes. There was only a bright, predatory expectancy. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the climate control system and the scratching of a pen on paper. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the gray Atlantic Ocean churned against the coastline, mirroring the storm that was brewing inside my chest. I kept my hands folded on the polished mahogany table, my face a mask of absolute neutrality. This was the first lesson my uncle, Elliot Sawyer, had drilled into me. Emotion is information. He would say, do not give it away for free. At the head of the table sat Marvin Klein, my uncle's personal attorney and perhaps the only man Elliot had ever fully trusted. Marvin was 70 years old, built like a retired linebacker, with eyes that missed nothing. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the three of us with a professional detachment that bordered on disdain. He placed a small digital recorder in the center of the table and pressed a button. A tiny red light flickered to life, the only warm color in the sterile room. "This reading is now in session," Marvin said, his voice deep and gravelly. "I must remind all parties present that these proceedings are being recorded. The contents of the last will and testament of Elliot Sawyer are legally sealed until the conclusion of this meeting. Any interruption or outburst will result in immediate removal from the premises." My mother, Paula Sawyer, shifted in her seat. She let out a soft, airy laugh, the kind used at cocktail parties to diffuse tension that she herself had created. She looked at Marvin, then turned her gaze toward me. It was the first time she had looked me in the eyes since I was 16 years old. "Oh, Marvin, don't be so dramatic," she said. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, melodic and deceptively sweet. "We are all family here. Isn't that right, sweetheart?" The word hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Sweetheart. It was the same word she had used when she promised to pick me up from school, only to leave me waiting on the curb for 3 hours. It was the same word she had used the night before she packed her bags and vanished, leaving me with an empty refrigerator and a pile of unpaid bills. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump, but I did not speak. I simply stared at her, forcing her to hold the weight of her own hypocrisy. Paula did not flinch. She smiled, a wide, dazzling expression that did not reach her eyes. She turned back to the lawyer and waved a manicured hand in the air. "It has been such a long time," she continued, leaning forward as if sharing a secret. "But tragedy brings people together, doesn't it? I know Elliot and I had our differences, but he was still my big brother. Morgan and I will work everything out. We can split the millions as a family. It is what he would have wanted." She said it so casually. Split the millions. As if the last 2 decades of silence were just a minor misunderstanding. As if she hadn't left me to rot. As if she hadn't left Elliot to die alone in a hospital room while she was vacationing in Europe. I saw Marvin's eyes narrow slightly, but he did not comment. He simply looked down at the document in front of him. "Let us proceed with the asset inventory," Marvin said, his tone cutting through her performance. He began to read. The list was extensive, a testament to the empire Elliot had built from nothing. He listed the primary residence, a sprawling estate on the cliffs of Ravenport, valued at $8 million. He listed a portfolio of patents related to encrypted data transmission, generating royalties in the mid-6 figures annually. He listed diversified investment accounts, bonded trusts, and offshore holdings. Then came the crown jewel, 76% controlling interest in Black Harbor Defense Group. Marvin read, a private cybersecurity and intelligence firm with active contracts in the public and private sectors. Estimated valuation at current market rates exceeds $40 million. The number hung in the air. $40 million. Beside my mother sat Grant Weller. He was her boyfriend, or maybe her new husband. The distinction hardly mattered. He was a man in his 50s who tried too hard to look 40, wearing a suit that was too shiny and a watch that was too big. When Marvin said the words, $40 million, Grant's eyes widened, and he licked his lips. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick blue folder. He slid it across the polished table toward Marvin with an arrogant smoothness. Grant cleared his throat. We assumed the estate would be complex, he said, his voice oily and confident. So, to save everyone time, Paula and I had our legal team draw up some preliminary family settlement terms. We are willing to be generous with Morgan. Of course, a flat payout to set her up, and then Paula will take over the administrative burden of the company. We want to honor Elliot's legacy by keeping it in experienced hands. I almost laughed. The idea of Paula running a defense contractor was absurd. She couldn't even manage a household budget. But Grant wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the folder as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Marvin did not touch the folder. He did not even look at it. He simply stopped reading. The silence in the room stretched thin, transforming from awkward to suffocating. Marvin reached into his briefcase and produced a second envelope. It was not a standard legal document. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. On the front, typed in bold, aggressive font, were the words, Conditional Addendum. Read only if Paula Sawyer appears. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out by a sudden depressurization. Paula froze. Her hand, which had been reaching for a glass of water, stopped in midair. For half a second, the mask slipped. I saw panic. I saw recognition. She knew that font. She knew that tone. It was the voice of a man who played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. She let out another laugh, but this one was brittle. It sounded like dry leaves being crushed. Oh, Elliot, she said, shaking her head, always with the theatrics, even from the grave. What is this? Some kind of final joke. Marvin placed his hand on the envelope. He looked directly at my mother, his expression grave. Your brother anticipated today. Marvin said. The words were quiet, but they carried the force of a judgment. He planned for it in detail. He gave me explicit instructions that this envelope was only to be produced if you physically attended the reading, if you had stayed away, if you had simply allowed Morgan to grieve in peace. This document would have remained sealed forever. My mother's smile faltered. The corners of her mouth twitched. She looked at the envelope, then at me. Suddenly, she reached under the table and grabbed my hand. Her palm was cold and clammy. She squeezed my fingers tight, locking her grip like a vice. Morgan, honey, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Don't let them do this. Your uncle he was a difficult man. He held grudges. You know that. We are the only family left. We have to stick together against the lawyers. Whatever is in there, we can ignore it. We can make our own deal. I looked down at our joined hands. Her knuckles were white. She wasn't holding my hand because she loved me. She was holding on to me like a human shield. She was terrified. I slowly, deliberately, pulled my hand away. I placed it back on the table, separate from hers. Let him read it, I said. My voice was steady. Grant looked like he wanted to intervene, to shout, to throw the table over. But the red light on the recorder kept him frozen in his seat. He knew that any aggression now would only complicate their claim to the $40 million. Marvin broke the wax seal. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping. He unfolded the document inside. It was a single page, dense with text. Paula's face began to lose color before Marvin even finished scanning the first paragraph. Her tan seemed to turn gray, and the perfect makeup suddenly looked like paint on a cracking wall. She knew. Deep down, she knew what was coming. Marvin cleared his throat and began to read the addendum aloud. I, Elliot Sawyer, being of sound mind and judgment, hereby enact the following clause regarding the distribution of my estate. This clause is triggered solely by the presence of my sister, Paula Sawyer, at the reading of my will. Her presence confirms that she has not respected the boundaries established 18 years ago and is seeking financial gain from my death. Therefore, the following conditions are now in effect. Marvin paused. He looked up over the rim of his glasses. Paula was not smiling anymore. She was staring at the paper in Marvin's hands with the look of someone watching a grenade roll into the room. Grant leaned forward, aggressive now. This is ridiculous. You can't condition an inheritance on— Sit down. Mr. Weller, Marvin snapped. I am not finished. The lawyer looked back at the page. To my niece, Morgan Allen, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, liquid assets, and the controlling interest in Black Harbor Defense Group. However, should Paula Sawyer contest this will, attempt to claim any portion of these assets, or fail to sign the attached admission of abandonment and debt acknowledgement, a secondary protocol will be initiated immediately. Admission of abandonment. The words hung in the air. Toxic and heavy. What is that? Paula whispered. Her voice was trembling. Marvin turned the page to reveal a second document attached to the back. It is a sworn statement, Marvin explained calmly. It details the events of November 4th, 18 years ago. It outlines the state in which you left your 16-year-old daughter. It also details the loan you attempted to take out in Elliot's name 7 years ago, which constitutes federal wire fraud. Elliot paid the legal fees to bury that charge to protect the family name, but he kept the file. Paula went white, truly, ghostly white. She looked like she might faint. If you sign this document, admitting to these facts and agreeing to a lifetime ban from contacting Morgan Allen or Black Harbor personnel, you will receive a one-time settlement of $50,000. Marvin continued, if you refuse to sign, or if you attempt to fight this will in court, the poison pill clause is triggered. Poison pill, Grant asked, his voice high and tight. In the event of a contest, Marvin read, the entirety of the estate, every dollar, every share, every brick of the house will be immediately liquidated and donated to the Sawyer Foundation for Homeless Youth. Neither Morgan Allen nor Paula Sawyer will receive a single cent. The room went dead silent. I looked at my mother. The realization was washing over her. She thought she was fighting me for a slice of the pie. She didn't realize that Elliot had rigged the entire bakery to explode. This is a bluff, Grant hissed. No one destroys $40 million just to make a point. You didn't know my uncle, I said softly. Marvin looked at Paula. The choice is yours. Ms. Sawyer, you can walk away with $50,000 and your freedom, or you can fight for millions and ensure that no one gets anything. And keep in mind, if you fight, that evidence regarding the wire fraud goes to the district attorney. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were wide, pleading, desperate. She looked at the millions she had already spent in her head. She looked at the trap that had just snapped shut around her ankle. Morgan, she choked out, you can't let him do this. You're his heir. You can stop it. Tell him we'll make a deal. I leaned back in my chair. The leather was cool against my spine. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't the scared girl waiting on the curb. I was the one holding the keys. I don't make deals with terrorists, Mom, I said, and then I waited for her to make her move. The silence was the first thing that hit me. It was not the peaceful silence of a library or a church, but the heavy, stagnant silence of a tomb. I was 16 years old, returning from a 6-hour shift at a diner where the grease clung to my skin like a second layer of clothing. I had $12 in tips crumpled in my jeans pocket, and all I wanted was to heat up a frozen burrito and fall asleep to the sound of the television. Usually, the apartment was a cacophony of noise. My mother, Paula, hated quiet. She filled every room with sound reality TV shows blasting at volume 50. Phone conversations on speaker where she complained to her friends about how the world had wronged her, or just the heavy thud of her pacing when she was between moods. But that Tuesday night, opening the door felt like stepping into a vacuum. The television was black. The air smelled stale, like old coffee and dust. I called out her name, but my voice just bounced off the peeling beige paint in the hallway. I dropped my backpack on the linoleum floor and walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed, a mechanical rattle that sounded deafening in the quiet. I opened it, a half-empty carton of milk, a jar of pickles, and a shriveled lemon. The frozen burritos were gone. I went to her bedroom. The door was ajar. I did not panic immediately. Panic is a luxury for people who are not used to instability. Instead, I felt a cold, sinking sensation in my gut. A feeling I had grown up with, like missing a step on a staircase in the dark. I pushed the door open. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled, but it was the closet that confirmed the feeling in my stomach. It was gaping open, and where her clothes used to be, there was only a row of empty wire hangers. They chimed softly against each other as the draft from the hallway hit them. Her good coat was gone. Her shoes were gone. The 2 suitcases that usually gathered dust under the window were missing. I went back to the kitchen. That was when I saw the note on the counter, held down by a salt shaker. It was written on the back of an overdue electric bill. Her handwriting was jagged, rushed, the loops of the letters sharp and aggressive. It did not say she was sorry. It did not say she loved me. It said, simply, I cannot do this anymore. I need to breathe. You are 16. You will be fine. Don't look for me. I stood there for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. I did not cry. Crying would have implied surprise, and deep down, beneath the layers of denial, I was not surprised. I was just exhausted. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, then pulled it out 5 seconds later and smoothed it flat on the counter. I needed proof. If I threw it away, I might convince myself in the morning that she had just gone to the store. For 3 days, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I went to school because it was warm and they served free breakfast. I went to my shift at the diner because I needed money for food. I came home to the silent apartment and slept with the lights on. I told no one. I checked my phone every 10 minutes, waiting for a text, a call, a voicemail. I called her number so many times that I memorized the exact cadence of the automated operator telling me the subscriber was unavailable. I convinced myself she was having an episode. She would cool off. She would run out of money. She would come back and act like nothing happened. And I would scream at her, and then we would order pizza. That was the cycle. Cycles were comforting because they were predictable, but the cycle broke on Friday afternoon. I was sitting on the couch, eating peanut butter out of the jar with a spoon, when a heavy fist pounded on the front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought, for one wild, hopeful second, that she had lost her keys. I opened the door. It was not my mother. It was the landlord, a man with a thick neck and eyes that looked like wet stones. He looked over my shoulder, scanning the empty living room. "Where is she?" he demanded. "She is at work." I lied. The lie tasted like ash. "She will be back later." "Don't give me that." He spat. "I haven't seen her car in 4 days, and the rent is 2 months late. I told her last week. No more chances." 2 months? I felt the blood drain from my face. She told me she paid it. She showed me the confirmation number. She lied. He said, his voice flat and uninterested in my shock. "You tell her she has 24 hours to have the full amount, cash or certified check, or I am changing the locks and calling the sheriff. And if she is gone, I am calling child services. I am not running a halfway house for runaways." He slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The denial shattered. The reality of the situation rushed in like freezing water. I was 16. I had $12.40. I had no food. I was about to be homeless. And my mother had lied about the rent for 2 months while watching me pick up extra shifts to pay for groceries. I spent that night packing. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I put my school books, my 2 pairs of jeans, my uniform, and a photo of me and my dad, who I barely remembered, into a backpack. I sat on the floor of the empty living room and waited for the sun to come up. The next morning, I walked into the school guidance counselor's office. Ms. Alvarez was a kind woman with tired eyes who always smelled like peppermint tea. I sat in the chair across from her desk, gripping the straps of my backpack until my knuckles turned white. "Morgan," she asked gently, "is everything okay? You have been late 3 times this week." I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. I took a breath, shaky and shallow. I didn't want to tell her. Telling her made it real. Telling her meant I was officially a victim, a charity case, a statistic, but the memory of the landlord's fist on the door was louder than my pride. My mom left. I said, the words came out as a whisper. Ms. Alvarez put her pen down. When Tuesday, I said, she is not coming back, and we are getting evicted today. The machinery of the system ground into gear immediately. There were phone calls. There were forms. A social worker named Mrs. Gable arrived within the hour. She was brisk and efficient, carrying a clipboard like a shield. They asked me questions. Did I have other family? Did I have a place to go? I gave them the only name I knew, Elliot Sawyer. My mother rarely spoke of her brother, and when she did, it was with venom. She called him a robot, a control freak, a man who loved spreadsheets more than people. She said he looked down on us from his ivory tower. I had not seen him since I was 5 years old. I didn't even know where he lived, only that he was somewhere in the state and that he was successful. I sat in the main office for 4 hours while Mrs. Gable made calls. I watched the clock on the wall tick away the seconds of my life. I imagined foster homes. I imagined sleeping in a shelter. I prepared myself for the news that he didn't want me. Why would he? His sister had abandoned me. Why should he pick up the pieces then? The heavy double doors of the school entrance swung open. Elliot Sawyer did not look like a savior. He looked like a man who had been interrupted in the middle of a very important merger. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, with a crisp white shirt and a tie that looked more expensive than my mother's car. His face was sharp, angular, and completely unreadable. He walked into the office with a stride that commanded attention. Ms. Alvarez and Mrs. Gable stood up. He ignored them and looked directly at me. His eyes were gray, the color of steel. He scanned me from head to toe, taking in my dirty sneakers, my frayed jeans, the exhaustion etched under my eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't rush over to hug me. He didn't offer empty platitudes about how everything was going to be all right. He looked at the social worker. Is the paperwork ready, Mrs. Gable blinked. Yes, Mr. Sawyer. We just need to verify temporary guardianship and I have my legal team handling the filing, he interrupted. His voice was calm, deep, and absolutely final. I am taking her now. He signed the papers without sitting down. He didn't ask about my mother. He didn't ask why she left. He treated the situation like a logistical error that needed to be corrected. When he was finished, he turned to me. He pointed to my backpack. Is that everything he asked? I nodded. Yes, pack what matters, he said. We leave today. I followed him out to the parking lot. He drove a black sedan that shone under the afternoon sun. He opened the trunk, and I threw my backpack inside. It looked pathetic in the vast, carpeted space. I climbed into the passenger seat. The interior smelled of leather and nothing else. No fast food wrappers, no air freshener, no clutter. It was pristine. He got in the driver's side and started the engine. It purred so quietly I could barely hear it. As we pulled out of the school lot, I looked out the window. I watched the building recede, watching my old life shrink until it disappeared around a corner. I felt a sudden, violent wave of terror. I was in a car with a stranger. I was going to a place I didn't know. I had no one. Elliot didn't turn on the radio. He drove with both hands on the wheel, his eyes on the road. After 10 minutes of silence, he spoke. I know what she told you about me, he said. He didn't look at me. She told you I was cold. She told you I didn't care. I didn't answer. I just stared at my hands. She was right about the cold part. He continued. I am not going to be a father to you. Morgan, I don't know how to do that. And I am not going to be your friend. I felt tears prick the back of my eyes. This was it. He was going to drop me off at a boarding school or a convent. But, he said, his voice hardening, I am dependable. You will have a roof. You will have food. You will have an education. And you will never have to wonder if the lights are going to turn on when you flip the switch. He stopped at a red light and finally looked at me. His expression was intense, almost angry, but not at me. It was an anger directed at the universe, at the chaos that had allowed a 16-year-old girl to be thrown away like trash. You won't beg for stability again, he said. The light turned green. He accelerated, the car moving smoothly onto the highway. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. I should have felt relieved. I had been rescued. I was safe. But as I watched the highway markers fly by, I realized I was more terrified than I had been in the empty apartment. I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of the promise. I was afraid of the stability he offered. Because if I let myself believe in it, if I let myself get used to a full fridge and a warm bed, and a life where adults didn't leave in the middle of the night, then the next time the floor dropped out, it wouldn't just hurt, it would kill me. I closed my eyes and tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was the thing that broke you. But as the miles put distance between me and the mother who left, the hum of the engine felt dangerously like a heartbeat I wanted to trust. Living in Elliot Sawyer's house was like living inside a Swiss watch. Everything was calibrated, silent, and terrifyingly efficient. The chaos of my previous life, the unpaid bills, the screaming matches, the uncertainty of whether there would be milk in the fridge was replaced by a silence that felt heavy enough to bruise. His estate in Ravenport was not a home in the traditional sense. It was a structure of glass, steel, and dark wood, perched on a cliff edge as if daring the ocean to erode it. Inside, there was no dust. There were no piles of mail on the counter. There were no shoes left in the hallway. The air was filtered and cool, maintained at a constant 68 degrees. For the first week, I walked around on my tiptoes, afraid that if I made a sound, the house would reject me like a virus. Elliot did not believe in parenting. He believed in management. On my second morning, I came down to the kitchen at 10 o'clock, wearing my pajamas, eyes bleary from a night of staring at the ceiling. Elliot was already gone, but on the marble island, there was a single sheet of heavy bond paper with my name printed at the top. It was not a chore list. It was a schedule. 6:30 in the morning, wake up. 7 o'clock breakfast. 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock school. 3:30 to 4:30, physical activity. 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, skill acquisition. 6:30 dinner. 10 o'clock, lights out. I stared at the paper. It looked like a prison sentence. I crumpled it up and threw it in the stainless steel bin. When Elliot returned that evening, the house was dark. I was watching television in the living room, my feet on the coffee table, a bag of chips open beside me. I was waiting for him. I wanted him to yell. I wanted him to lose his temper. If he yelled, I would know where I stood. If he screamed at me, he would be just like my mother, and I knew how to handle screaming. You tune it out. You wait for the explosion to end. Elliot walked in. He looked at the television, then at my feet on the table, then at the chip crumbs on the floor. He did not yell. He did not even frown. He simply walked over to the wall, picked up a remote, and turned off the television. The room plunged into silence. Dinner was at 6:30, he said, his voice even. It is now 7:15. I shrugged, a gesture of teenage defiance I had perfected. I wasn't hungry. He looked at me, and his eyes were like calm water. Hunger is biological. Scheduling is structural. If you are not present at the table at 6:30, the kitchen closes. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and went to his study. He closed the door. I sat there, stunned. He wasn't going to fight me. He wasn't going to drag me into a drama. He was just going to let the system run. I went to the kitchen. The fridge was stocked, but there were no prepared meals. I ate a raw apple and went to bed angry. This became our dance. I tested the perimeter, looking for the electric fence, and Elliot simply moved the fence without saying a word. I skipped the skill acquisition hour to listen to music. The next day, the Wi-Fi password had been changed. I asked for it, and he handed me a textbook on basic network security. You want access, he asked? Crack the new password. The hint is in Chapter 3. It took me 4 hours. I missed dinner again, but when I finally typed in the correct sequence of characters and the internet icon lit up, I felt a surge of dopamine I hadn't expected. I walked into his study, triumphant. I got it. I said. He didn't look up from his laptop. Good. Tomorrow. The encryption will be harder. He wasn't punishing me. He was training me. He was teaching me that the world did not care about my feelings, but it respected competence. The skill acquisition hour became the center of my life, mostly because I had no choice. He didn't care about my grades in history or art. He cared about leverage. 1 hour a day. You learn a skill that pays. He told me during one of our quiet dinners, the world is full of people with opinions. It is short on people who can solve expensive problems. He taught me how to read a balance sheet. He taught me the basics of contract law. He made me memorize the logical fallacies so I could dismantle an argument in real time. It was exhausting, dry, and relentless. But it was also the first time in my life that an adult was investing time in me. Even if that investment felt like programming a computer, sometimes, he took me to his office at Black Harbor Defense Group. The building was a fortress of glass in the city, filled with people who walked fast and spoke in acronyms. I expected Elliot to be the loudest voice in the room. I expected him to dominate like the alpha males on television. I was wrong. I sat in the corner of a conference room during a negotiation with a vendor who was trying to renegotiate a service contract. The vendor, a man with a loud tie and a sweaty forehead, talked for 20 minutes straight. He used buzzwords. He made jokes. He slammed his hand on the table to emphasize his points. Elliot sat perfectly still. He didn't nod. He didn't interrupt. He just watched the man's mouth. When the man finally stopped, breathless and expecting a fight, Elliot waited 4 full seconds. The silence stretched until the vendor started fidgeting. "Your operational costs haven't increased," Elliot said softly. "You are trying to cover a loss from another client by padding our invoice." The man sputtered. That is not true. We are seeing supply chain issues across the board." Elliot slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the vendor's own quarterly earnings report, which had been released that morning. "You posted record profits in your supply division," Elliot said, "but your logistics arm is bleeding cash." The man deflated. He signed the original contract without another word. In the car ride home, I asked him how he knew the man was lying before he even showed the paper. Elliot looked at the road. "Truth gets irritated," he said. "When you accuse someone of something they didn't do, they get angry, they get messy. But lies get careful." That man was rehearsing his speech. He was too structured. He was protecting a narrative, not stating a fact. I looked at him, really looked at him. I realized then that my mother was a liar. I remembered how careful she was when she promised she would pay the rent. I remembered the elaborate stories she spun about why she lost her jobs. She wasn't just unlucky. She was a careful architect of her own disasters. But even with the structure, the trauma was still there, lurking under the surface of my new routine. It hit me 3 weeks in. I woke up at 2 a.m, gasping for air. The nightmare was always the same. I was back in the apartment. The walls were closing in, and the silence was filling my lungs like water. I couldn't breathe. I sat up in bed, shaking, tears streaming down my face. I tried to be quiet. I didn't want to wake him. I didn't want to be a burden. But the house heard everything. There was a soft knock on my door. It opened, and a slice of hallway light cut across the floor. Elliot stood there. He was wearing a dark robe, his hair mussed from sleep. He saw me. He saw the tears, the shaking shoulders, the panic in my eyes. I braced myself for the awkward questions. "What's wrong? Did you have a bad dream? Do you want to talk about it?" He did none of those things. He didn't cross the room to hug me. He knew, somehow, that physical contact would make me shatter. He walked into the room and placed a box of tissues on the nightstand. Then he pulled the desk chair over, turned it to face the window, and sat down. He didn't look at me. He just sat there in the dark, a silent, solid presence in the corner of the room. "Breathe," he said. "Just breathe." He waited. He didn't check his watch. He didn't sigh. He just anchored the room. I cried until my chest hurt. I cried for the mother who left, for the father I never knew, for the girl who had to count change for a burrito. And through it all, Elliot stayed. When I finally stopped, the silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. He stood up and poured me a glass of water from the carafe on the desk. "I am not good at comfort, Morgan," he said, his voice low. "I don't know the right words. I deal in logistics." He placed the water in my hand. "But I know that panic is a loop," he continued. "You are looking for a door that isn't there. My job isn't to make you feel better. It is to build you an exit. What does that mean? I asked, my voice raspy. It means we build a life so solid that you never have to be scared of the floor dropping out again. He said, emotions are variables. Systems are constants. We focus on the constants. He walked to the door. Try to sleep. We have a schedule to keep. He closed the door. I drank the water. It was cool and clean. I lay back down, pulling the duvet up to my chin. For the first time in months, my heart wasn't racing. He hadn't offered me love. He hadn't offered me pity. He had offered me something stronger: security. I realized then that Elliot Sawyer wasn't cold. He was just insulated. He had built walls to keep the chaos out, and now he had extended those walls to include me. I closed my eyes. The ocean crashed against the cliffs outside, a rhythmic, powerful sound. I didn't need to check if the door was locked. I didn't need to worry about eviction notices. The scariest thing wasn't the nightmare. The scariest thing was the realization that followed it. I was starting to feel safe. This house, with its rules and its silence and its emotionally distant owner, was beginning to feel like mine. And that terrified me more than anything, because I knew how much it would hurt to lose it. But for the first time, as I drifted off to sleep, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time was different. The skill acquisition for tomorrow was waiting, and for the first time, I didn't want to miss it. If the first few months at Elliot's house were about stabilization, the next 2 years were about acceleration. I had assumed that once I stopped drowning, I would be allowed to float. I was wrong. Elliot did not believe in floating. To him, staying still was just a slower way of sinking. The shift happened over a single weekend in late August. I was preparing to go back to the public high school I had attended before the eviction, but Elliot had other plans. He placed a stack of brochures and application forms on the kitchen counter. They were for the Sterling Academy, a private preparatory school in the city that cost more per semester than my mother had earned in 5 years. I am not smart enough for this, I told him, looking at the course catalog. Advanced placement everything, Latin, macroeconomics. It looked like a training ground for future senators, not a place for a girl who had spent her sophomore year dodging a landlord. You are not going there because you are smart, Elliot replied, pouring his morning coffee. You are going there because you are behind. Intelligence is potential. Education is calibration. We need to recalibrate you. He had already arranged the entrance exams. I took them in a cold, quiet room with a proctor who looked at my old school transcripts with mild confusion. I didn't ace them. I barely scraped by. But Elliot made a donation to the science wing, and suddenly, I was enrolled. The culture shock was violent. At my old school, kids talked about survival who got suspended, who was pregnant, who had a hookup for cheap cigarettes. At Sterling, the students talked about internships like they were birthdays. They discussed their parents' portfolios and summer programs in Geneva. I walked through the halls wearing the uniform that Elliot had bought. Feeling like a spy in enemy territory, I kept my head down. I didn't speak in class. I was terrified that if I opened my mouth, the poverty I had come from would spill out and stain the polished floors. My first report card arrived in October. I brought it home like a grenade. I placed it on Elliot's desk and waited for the explosion. It was a disaster of mediocrity, a 75 in calculus, a 78 in history, and an 80 in literature. By Sterling standards, I was failing. Elliot put on his glasses. He scanned the paper for a long minute. I braced myself for the lecture. I expected him to tell me I was ungrateful, that he was wasting his money. This is useful data, he said finally. I blinked. Useful data. I am failing math. You are not failing, he corrected. You are inefficient. A 75 tells us that you understand 3/4 of the material. The missing 25% is not a lack of intelligence. It is a gap in the foundation. He pulled out a legal pad and a pen. He didn't yell. He drew a grid. We treat weakness like a map, he said, his voice devoid of judgment. You cannot fix bad at math. That is too vague. But you can fix weakness in derivative functions. You can fix poor time management on essay drafts. We are going to isolate the variables. That night, my life changed from a routine to a regime. We analyzed every mistake on every test. Elliot didn't do the work for me. That was the one rule he never broke. If I asked for the answer, he would close the book and walk away. He would only help me find the path to the answer. I remember one night in November, I was sobbing over a physics project. I had to build a working model of a trebuchet and calculate the trajectory variance. It was 2 a.m. The model kept collapsing. I was tired, frustrated, and feeling the old familiar panic rising in my throat. I can't do it, I whispered, putting my head in my hands. It is too hard. Elliot was sitting in the armchair reading a quarterly report. He didn't look up. The wood is splitting because your tension is too high, he said calmly. You are forcing the torque instead of leveraging the counterweight. I don't care about the counterweight, I shouted. I just want to sleep. He stood up then. He walked over to the table and looked at my broken model. Then go to sleep, he said. And tomorrow, you can go to school and tell your teacher that you quit because you were tired. You can tell them that when the pressure got real, you folded. Is that the narrative you want on your record? I hated him in that moment. I hated his calm, his logic, his absolute refusal to pity me. But I didn't go to sleep. I took the model apart. I rebuilt the frame. I recalculated the weight ratios. At 4:30 a.m, the trebuchet fired a marble perfectly across the room. Elliot was still in the chair. He hadn't slept either. Good, he said. Now clean it up. That was the turning point. I stopped looking for validation and started looking for results. I began to approach school the way Elliot approached business. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to acquire assets. The assets were grades, recommendations, and knowledge. By spring, a strange thing happened. I was sitting in the library, working through a complex set of chemistry equations, when a girl named Sarah pulled out a chair opposite me. Sarah was the daughter of a senator. She drove a Range Rover and usually looked through me like I was glass. Hey, she said, looking uncomfortable. I heard you got a 98 on the midterm. I didn't look up. 97? Right, she said. Look, I am drowning in stoichiometry. Can I see your notes? I looked at her then. 6 months ago, I would have been desperate for her attention. I would have given her everything just to be acknowledged. But Elliot had rewired me. I didn't need her to like me. My notes are in shorthand, I said, but I am reviewing chapter 4 at 6 o'clock. You can sit in if you stay quiet. She sat in. The next day, 2 other students joined. By final exams, I was leading a study group of 5 of the wealthiest kids in the state. They didn't hang out with me because I was cool. They hung out with me because I was relentless. I was the machine that dragged them across the finish line. I stopped apologizing for taking up space in the classroom. When a teacher asked a question, I didn't raise my hand tentatively. I raised it like a flag. I knew the answer, not because I was a genius, but because I had outworked everyone else in the room. The confidence wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was the knowledge that I could walk into a room, assess the requirements, and execute the necessary tasks to survive. Then came the college applications. This was the war. I had made a list of state schools, good schools, respectable schools, but safe schools. I showed the list to Elliot over dinner. He read it, then placed it on the table and placed his water glass on top of it, leaving a wet ring on the paper. No, he said. What do you mean? No, I asked. These are good programs. I have the grades for them. I will get a scholarship. You are aiming for the floor. He said, you are applying to these schools because you know you will get in. You are mitigating risk. I am being realistic. I argued. You are being a coward, he countered. He pushed the list away. You will apply to the top tier. You will apply to programs that might reject you. You will apply to the ones that scare you. But what if I don't get in? I asked, my voice rising. What if I aim high and miss? Then I have nothing. Then you adjust, he said. But you do not start the negotiation by compromising. I slammed my hand on the table. Why do you push me like this? Why can't you just be happy that I'm doing well? Why does it always have to be a battle? You act like I'm a soldier. Not a person, Elliot looked at me. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. A shadow of something old and painful crossed his face. Your mother, he said quietly, confused love with escape. I froze. He rarely spoke of her. She thought that loving you meant hiding you from the hard things. He continued, She thought that if she ran away from problems, she was protecting you from them. She wanted to be your friend. She wanted you to like her. And because she refused to push you, she left you defenseless. He leaned forward, his gray eyes locking onto mine. I will not make that mistake. Morgan, I do not care if you like me. I do not care if you think I am a tyrant. My job is not to make you happy today. My job is to make sure that 10 years from now, you are formidable enough that no one can ever discard you again. I am not raising a victim. I am raising a survivor. The words hit me harder than any shout could have. He wasn't pushing me because he was cruel. He was pushing me because he was terrified that the world would eat me alive if he didn't. He was trying to armor plate my life with competence. I picked up the list of safe schools and tore it in half. Fine, I said. I will apply to the top tier. But if I get rejected, you have to buy me a car. He almost smiled. A car is a depreciating asset. If you get rejected, I will buy you a lesson in resilience. I applied. The waiting period was agony. I checked the mail every day with a knot in my stomach. The rejection letters came first, 2 of them. Thin envelopes that said, "We regret to inform you." Elliot didn't let me mourn them. He just filed them away. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in March, the thick envelope arrived. It was from a university 3,000 miles away, a top 5 program known for its brutal economics curriculum and its single-digit acceptance rate. I held the envelope in the hallway, afraid to open it. Elliot walked by, saw me standing there, and stopped. "Open it," he said. I tore the seal. I read the first line. "Congratulations." I felt a rush of adrenaline so strong my knees shook. I looked up at him, grinning like an idiot. I got in. I said, I actually got in. I waited for the high five. I waited for the hug. I waited for him to tell me he was proud. Elliot looked at the letter, then at me. He nodded once, a sharp, precise movement. "Good," he said. "That was it. No party, no balloons." "Now build," he added, and walked into his office. I stood there for a moment, feeling a flash of annoyance. But then I looked at the letter again. I realized that his reaction was the highest compliment he could give me. He wasn't surprised. He expected this. He had looked at the data, looked at the work I had put in, and concluded that this was the logical outcome. He didn't celebrate it as a miracle. He acknowledged it as a payment received for services rendered. I went up to my room and pinned the acceptance letter to my corkboard, right next to the schedule he had given me 2 years ago. I looked at the girl in the mirror. She looked tired. She looked serious. But she didn't look scared anymore. I packed my bag for the library. I had finals coming up, and getting into college was just the entry fee. Staying there would be the real work. I heard Elliot's voice in my head. Now build. I opened my calculus textbook. I had a chapter to review before dinner. The diploma from the prestigious university was mailed to the house in a stiff cardboard tube. I never framed it. Elliot did not believe in displaying past victories. He believed in current utility. 4 days after graduation, I returned to Ravenport, not as a prodigy or a beloved niece, but as a junior analyst at Black Harbor Defense Group. There was no nepotism at Black Harbor. In fact, bearing the name of the founder's niece was a liability. It painted a target on my back. Elliot had made the terms of my employment explicitly clear. I would start at the bottom tier of the compliance department. I would work in a cubicle that smelled of recycled air and ozone. I would report to a middle manager named David, who was terrified of Elliot and therefore twice as hard on me to prove he wasn't playing favorites. I learned the business not by leading it, but by dissecting it. For 2 years, I lived in the connective tissue of the corporation. I memorized the architecture of government contracts, the dense, unreadable language of liability clauses, and the brutal mathematics of risk assessment. Black Harbor did not sell weapons. We sold digital fortresses. We protected the data of banks, healthcare systems, and defense contractors. We sold peace of mind to people who had very expensive secrets. I also learned that Elliot's world was not a clean place. It was sterile, yes, but it was filled with a quiet, suffocating violence. His enemies were not loud. They did not throw bricks through windows or make public threats. They were men in Italian suits who smiled across boardroom tables. They were strategic partners who tried to bury poison pills in merger agreements. They were competitors who would happily bankrupt a subsidiary just to lower our stock price by 2 points. I watched Elliot navigate this shark tank with the same terrifying calm he used to navigate our dinner schedule. He spoke softly. He never made a threat. He wasn't ready to execute immediately. I saw him dismantle a hostile takeover attempt by a rival firm simply by pointing out a regulatory violation in their European holding company that they thought was buried. He didn't shout. He just slid a file across the table and waited for them to bleed. But the real threat wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the logs. It happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. I was working late, auditing the server access logs for our Tier 1 clients. It was tedious work, scanning thousands of lines of code for anomalies. Most of it was noise-automated bots pinging the firewall, harmless glitches. But then I saw a pattern that made me pause. It was a series of failed login attempts targeting the administrative root of our legacy archive. That in itself wasn't rare. Hackers tried to kick down our doors every day. What was strange was the origin. The IP address was bouncing through a VPN, but the packet timing signatures suggested a physical origin in the Pacific Northwest, specifically, a cluster of towns just outside of Seattle. I froze. My mother had talked about Seattle constantly when I was a child. It was her dream city, the place she always threatened to run away to when the rent in Massachusetts got too high. I ran a trace. The attempts were clumsy, almost desperate. They weren't using sophisticated military-grade scripts. They were using brute-force password guessers that you could buy on the dark web for $50. It felt personal. It felt like someone trying to jiggle a doorknob to see if the house was empty. I printed the logs and walked to Elliot's office. His executive assistant had gone home for the day. The office was dim, lit only by the glow of his monitors and the city lights outside the glass walls. Elliot was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. "I found something," I said, placing the paper on his desk. He turned slowly. He looked tired. That was the first time I really registered it. Not just sleepy, but deeply, structurally exhausted. The lines around his mouth were deeper. His suit jacket, usually tailored to perfection, hung slightly loose at the shoulders. He picked up the paper. He scanned the lines of code. His eyes stopped at the location data. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw a flash of recognition, followed immediately by a cold, hard shudder coming down. "It is just a script, Kitty," he said. Dropping the paper into the shredder, a botnet infected a server in Washington state. "It is random noise." "It is not random," I argued. "It is targeting the legacy archive, specifically, the personal asset folders, and it is coming from the one place she always said she wanted to go." Elliot looked at me. His face was a stone wall. "Do not look for ghosts. Morgan," he said, "it is a waste of resources. Focus on your audit." He turned back to the window, effectively dismissing me. But I didn't leave. I stood there, watching the back of his neck. The tension held in his shoulders. He was lying. He knew exactly what those pings were. He knew who was behind the keyboard, or at least who had hired the person behind the keyboard. A week later, I found the confirmation. Elliot had been called away to an emergency meeting with the board of directors. He had left his office door unlocked. A rare oversight. I needed a signature on a compliance form. So I walked in. He wasn't there, but the room felt heavy with his presence. I walked behind his desk. I shouldn't have done it. It was a violation of the hierarchy, a violation of the trust he had built with me. But the memory of those login attempts was itching under my skin. I looked at the credenza behind his desk. There was a row of filing cabinets, all locked, but one drawer was slightly ajar. I pulled it open. It was filled with black folders, all labeled with alphanumeric codes, except for one. In the back, there was a thick, red folder. The label was typed in bold, capital letters. "Paula, do not open without counsel." My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for it. My fingers brushed the cardstock. "Don't." The voice came from the doorway. It was quiet, low, and sharp as a razor. I snatched my hand back and spun around. Elliot was standing there. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was infinitely worse. He walked into the room and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. I expected him to fire me. I expected him to tell me to pack my box and leave. Instead, he walked past me, closed the drawer, and locked it with a key from his pocket. Then he leaned against the desk and crossed his arms. "Curiosity is a liability when it lacks discipline," he said. "You know she is out there," I said. My voice was shaking, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. The login attempts. That was her, or someone she knows. She is trying to find out how much you are worth. Elliot didn't deny it. He didn't gaslight me. She has been trying for years. He said simply, she sends emails. She has lawyers send inquiries. She tries to guess passwords. She is looking for a weak point. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I am an adult. I work here. I have a right to know." He looked at me with those steel gray eyes. "You have a right to be protected," he said. "Information is not a right. It is a tool. And until today, that information served no purpose other than to distract you." He tapped the locked drawer. "If she ever returns," he said, his voice hardening, "you will need facts, not feelings. You will need dates, timestamps, bank records, and legal precedents. That folder is not a diary, it is an arsenal, and you do not open the arsenal until the war starts." He pushed off the desk and walked to his chair. "Now, bring me the compliance form," he said. I handed it to him. He signed it without looking up. The subject was closed, but the dynamic had shifted. He knew that I was watching now, and I knew that he was hiding more than just a folder. Over the next 6 months, the transfer of power began. It wasn't official. There was no memo sent to the staff, but Elliot started copying me on emails that were way above my pay grade. He started inviting me to meetings with the strategic partners. He would sit silently while they talked, and then he would turn to me and say, "Morgan, what is your assessment of the liability here?" He was testing me in real time. He was forcing me to speak, to make decisions, to wield the authority of the Sawyer name. When I faltered, he didn't correct me in the room. He waited until we were in the car, and then he would dissect my performance with surgical precision. But as my responsibilities grew, Elliot seemed to shrink. I noticed it in the small things first. He stopped finishing his lunch. The meticulously prepared salads and proteins would go back to the kitchen half-eaten. He started wearing sweaters under his suit jackets, as if he couldn't get warm, even though the office thermostat was set to 72 degrees. Then came the missed days. Elliot Sawyer never missed a day of work. In the 10 years I had known him, he had worked through the flu, through blizzards, through power outages, but now, there were mornings when he didn't come in until 10 o'clock. There were afternoons when his calendar was blocked off for private appointments that lasted 3 hours. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the work, on the empire he was teaching me to run, but the dread was a cold current running beneath the floorboards. One evening in early spring, I walked into his office to deliver a quarterly report. He was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was staring at a blank monitor, his hand resting on his stomach. His face was gray, a pallor that looked unnatural under the fluorescent lights. He looked like he was in agony. He didn't hear me enter. I watched him for a moment, seeing the man who had been my pillar, my savior, my mentor, looking fragile and human. "Elliot," I said softly. He flinched. He straightened up immediately, composing his face into the familiar mask of stoicism, but he was too slow. I had seen the pain. "You are sick," I said. It wasn't a question. He looked at me. He opened his mouth to dismiss me, to tell me to get back to work, to quote some rule about boundaries. But he stopped. He looked at the woman standing in front of him, the woman he had built from the scared teenager on the curb. He realized, finally, that he couldn't lie to his own creation. He exhaled, a long, shaky breath. "There is a timeline," he said. His voice was steady, but it lacked its usual resonance. "What kind of timeline?" I asked. Walking closer to the desk, I felt cold all over. "Pancreatic," he said. By the time they found it, the strategic options were limited. I felt the room tilt. Pancreatic. The word was a death sentence. "How long?" I asked. I forced my voice not to break. I used the tone he taught me. Clinical. Direct. 6 months, he said. Maybe 8, if I'm stubborn. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to smash the glass walls of his office. After everything we had survived, after all the work, all the discipline, he was going to leave me. He was going to leave me alone in this tower of glass with the wolves circling at the bottom. "We need to get you to a specialist," I said, my mind racing. "There are experimental treatments in Zurich. There are new protocols. We have the money. We can fight this. Morgan," he said. He raised a hand to stop me. "We are not going to chase miracles," he said. "That is emotional gambling. The odds are the odds." He stood up. It took effort. I saw him brace his hands on the desk to push himself up. He walked around the desk and stood in front of me. "I am not going to spend my last 6 months vomiting in a clinic in Switzerland," he said. "I have work to do. I have an estate to secure. I have a company to protect. And I have you." He looked me in the eye. "You are not ready yet," he said. "You are competent, but you are not fortified. We have 6 months to finish your training. We have to download 20 years of experience into your head before the clock runs out." "But," I started. "No buts." He cut me off. He wasn't being cruel. He was being practical. He was budgeting his remaining life. "We are going to plan for the worst like professionals," he said. "We are going to audit every vulnerability. We are going to seal every crack. And we are going to make sure that when I am gone, that folder in the drawer is the only weapon you will ever need." He turned back to his computer and woke the screen. "Pull up the trust fund distribution charts," he said. "We have to restructure the voting rights tonight." I stood there, tears stinging my eyes, looking at this man who was dying by inches but refused to stop working. He was giving me everything he had left. He was turning his death into one final lesson in logistics. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I swallowed the grief. I locked it away in a box in my mind, just like he would have done. I pulled up a chair, which file I asked, and we went to work. The cancer moved fast, but Elliot moved faster. In those final months, the estate in Ravenport ceased to be a home and transformed into a command center. There were no hospital beds in the living room, no nurses speaking in hushed tones about comfort measures. Elliot refused to turn his sanctuary into a hospice. Instead, the dining room table became a staging ground for the most complex merger and acquisition of his career, the transfer of his life to mine. He brought in the cavalry, Marvin Klein, the lawyer with the linebacker build and the eyes of a shark, practically moved into the guest house. He was joined by a forensic accountant and an estate specialist named Sarah, who spoke about death with the casual efficiency of a travel agent booking a flight. They worked 12 hours a day, fueled by black coffee and Elliot's unyielding demand for precision. He called it redundancy for his life. In engineering, redundancy means having backup systems that kick in automatically when the primary system fails. Elliot was the primary system, I was the backup, and he was terrified that when the switch flipped, the load would crush me. We spent hours rehearsing scenarios. It was grueling. Repetitive work that felt less like estate planning and more like counterintelligence training. Elliot would sit in his armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket, his skin papery and pale, and throw disasters at me. Scenario 4. He would rasp, "The stock price dips 15% on the news of my death. A minority shareholder files a motion of no confidence in your appointment to the board. What is your move?" I would answer instantly, my voice trained to be steady. "I issue a press release confirming the succession plan was filed 2 years ago. I call the 3 largest institutional investors to reassure them of continuity. I threaten to dilute the minority shareholder's stake during the next capital raise if they disrupt operations." "Good," he would say, closing his eyes for a moment. Scenario 5. A tabloid runs a story claiming I was coerced into signing the will. They claim you manipulated a dying man. I release the video affidavits from your doctors confirming mental competency. I file a defamation suit within the hour. I do not comment to the press. He drilled me until the answers were automatic. He wanted to ensure that when the grief finally hit me, my muscle memory would keep the company running even if my heart was stopping. But the hardest session came on a Tuesday afternoon. When the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, Marvin and the accountant had left for the day. It was just the two of us. Elliot had a binder on his lap. It was not the red folder from his office. This was a black one. Thick and worn, he gestured for me to sit. "We have prepared for the business enemies," he said. His voice was weak. the energy draining out of him rapidly. Now we have to prepare for the personal ones. He opened the binder. You think your mother just left? He said. You think she walked out the door and forgot you existed? That is the story you tell yourself because it hurts less than the truth. I stiffened. What is the truth? She didn't forget. He said. She negotiated. He slid the binder across the small table between us. Inside were emails, dozens of them. I recognized the email address immediately. It was the one my mother had used for years, the one I had sent hundreds of messages to, begging her to come home. I looked at the dates. The first one was dated 3 weeks after she left me. Elliot, it read, I know you have her. I know you are playing the hero. If you want to keep playing the hero, it is going to cost you. I have friends in the press who would love to hear about how the billionaire brother let his sister rot while he stole her daughter. I need $10,000 wired to this account by Friday. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. She hadn't been missing. She had been watching. She knew exactly where I was. I turned the page. Another email. 6 months later. She is turning 18 soon. If you don't want me to show up at her graduation and make a scene, I need a car. A good one. There were years of them. Guilt trips. Threats. Demands. She had tried to leverage her abandonment into a paycheck. She had used me as a bargaining chip in a game I didn't even know was being played. Did you pay her? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. I felt dirty. Like I had been sold. Elliot shook his head. Not 1 cent. He said firmly. If you pay a blackmailer once, you pay them forever. I never replied. I never negotiated. But I saved everything. Every email. Every timestamp. Every IP address. He pointed to the binder. This is not just history. Morgan, this is ammunition. She believes she has a right to my estate because she is my sister. She believes she has a right to you because she gave birth to you. This binder proves that she relinquished those rights the moment she put a price tag on them. I closed the binder. I felt hollowed out. The last tiny, foolish hope that my mother had simply been too broken to care for me evaporated. She wasn't broken. She was transactional. Elliot saw the look on my face. He didn't offer a tissue. He offered a strategy. I have set up a new entity, he said, the Sawyer Foundation for Homeless Youth. I looked up, confused. You never mentioned a foundation. It is a dormant entity, he explained. It has no funding right now. It exists only on paper. But it is the trigger mechanism for the estate. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a sudden intensity. If the will is contested, he said, specifically by Paula Sawyer, the assets do not go into a frozen trust. They do not go to the state. The entire estate liquidates. The houses, the stocks, the accounts, everything is converted to cash and transferred irrevocably to the foundation. I stared at him. You are willing to burn it all down. You are willing to let the company dissolve just to stop her. He nodded. It is the ultimate poison pill. If she fights for the money vanishes, and it goes to help children who were abandoned exactly the way you were. It is poetic, and it is legally bulletproof. He sat back, exhausted by the speech. She will have a choice, he whispered. She can take a small settlement and walk away, or she can try to take it all and end up funding the very thing she refused to be a parent. He made me promise him one thing that night. It was the only time he asked for a vow rather than a signature. Do not chase revenge. Morgan, he said, revenge is emotional. It is messy. It makes you vulnerable because it requires you to get down in the mud with the enemy. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was frail, his skin cool to the touch. Let the truth do the damage, he said. You don't have to scream at her. You don't have to attack her. You just have to present the documents. The truth is heavier than any stone you can throw. Let the facts destroy her narrative. You stay clean. You stay above it. 2 days later. Elliot recorded the video. He kicked everyone out of the room, Marvin, the nurses, even me. He set up the camera himself. He wore his best suit, despite the fact that it hung on his frame like a shroud. He spent an hour in there, talking to a lens. When he came out, he handed me a flash drive. It was labeled in his sharp, angular handwriting, play only after the reading. Keep this safe, he said. If everything goes according to plan, you will never need to show this to anyone but yourself. But if she forces the issue, this is the final word. The end came a week later. It was a quiet Tuesday. The storm had passed, and the ocean outside was calm. A sheet of gray glass under a pale sky. Elliot was in his bed, propped up by pillows. He had stopped looking at emails. He had stopped asking for market updates. He was just looking at the light shifting on the water. I sat beside him, reading a book, just being there as the silence in the house shifted from efficient to sacred. He turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were clear, lucid in a way they hadn't been for days. "Morgan," he said, "I put the book down. I am here." He took a breath. It rattled in his chest. "When she shows up," he said, "and she will show up." I nodded. "I know. Do not be flattered," he said. His voice was faint, but the steel was still there. "She will cry. She will talk about family. She will tell you she missed you every day." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "She is coming for the money," he said. "Not you. Do not confuse the two. If you confuse them, she will win. I won't. I promised. I won't let her in." He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face as if he were memorizing a blueprint one last time. "You are good," he whispered. "You are built." Those were the last words he spoke to me. He didn't say "I love you." He didn't need to. He had spent 10 years building a fortress around me, brick by brick, lesson by lesson. He had turned me from a victim into a vault. That was a love far more profound than any greeting card sentiment. He closed his eyes. He died 4 hours later, quietly, efficiently, without chaos. When the paramedics arrived to take him away, I didn't cry. I stood in the doorway, watching them work, my back straight, my face dry. I felt a massive, crushing grief waiting in the wings, ready to swallow me whole. But I pushed it back. I had a schedule to keep. I had calls to make. I had a press release to issue. And I had a mother to prepare for. I walked into his office and sat in his chair. It felt too big, but I knew I would grow into it. I unlocked the drawer. I took out the red folder and the black binder. I placed them on the desk, side by side. The redundancy was in place. The system was live. I picked up the phone and dialed Marvin Klein. "It is done," I said. "Initiate the protocol." I hung up the phone and looked out at the ocean. The water was dark and deep and indifferent. I felt a strange, cold peace settle over me. Elliot was gone, but he had left the lights on, and he had left the weapon loaded. I was ready for the reading. Marvin Klein adjusted the spectacles on the bridge of his nose. The movement was slow, deliberate, and designed to command the absolute attention of the room. He picked up the heavy document that constituted the primary last will and testament of Elliot Sawyer. The red light on the digital recorder hummed, a silent witness to the carnage that was about to unfold. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting loosely in my lap. I knew what was coming. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times during the long, sleepless nights following Elliot's funeral, but knowing the script did not reduce the tension. It only heightened the anticipation of the crash. Marvin began to read. His voice was a deep baritone that filled the acoustic space of the conference room, leaving no room for interruption. Article 3, Distribution of Real Property. Marvin read, "To my niece, Morgan Allen, I devise and bequeath the real property located at 42 Cliffside Drive, Ravenport, Massachusetts, including all furnishings, art, and personal effects contained therein." My mother, Paula, let out a sharp intake of breath. Her eyes darted around the room, assessing the value of the paintings on the walls, the view of the ocean, the sheer square footage of the estate she had just lost. Marvin continued, ignoring her. Article 4. Distribution of financial assets. I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my investment portfolio, including all stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and cash equivalents held in the accounts listed in Schedule A, to Morgan Allen. Grant Weller shifted in his seat. The leather creaked loudly. His face, previously flushed with the anticipation of a payday, was beginning to turn a mottled shade of red. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, invading the neutral space. "And finally," Marvin said, his voice dropping an octave for emphasis, "Article 5. Business interests. I hereby transfer all ownership rights, including the 76% controlling interest in Black Harbor Defense Group and its subsidiaries, to Morgan Allen, to be held in her name with full voting privileges, effective immediately upon my death. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, Paula exploded. "This is impossible," she shrieked. She didn't stand up, but her body went rigid, vibrating with a kinetic fury. She slammed her hand onto the mahogany table. "He cannot do this. I am his sister. I am his only living blood relative besides her." She pointed a manicured finger at me. The accusation was clear. I was the thief. I was the interloper who had stolen her birthright. Grant placed a hand on her arm, not to calm her, but to take control of the offensive. He looked at Marvin with a sneer that was meant to be intimidating but only came across as desperate. "Let us be reasonable, Mr. Klein," Grant said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. We all know Elliot was not in his right mind at the end. He was sick. He was on heavy medication, and he was isolated in this house with a young woman who clearly had a vested interest in turning him against his family. I felt the anger flare in my chest. Hot and sharp, they were rewriting history in real time. They were turning Elliot's discipline into dementia and my loyalty into manipulation. But I remembered Elliot's voice. Truth gets irritated, lies get careful. I stayed silent. I let them dig. "That is undue influence," Grant continued. "Gaining momentum, we will file a contest immediately. No judge in Massachusetts will uphold a will that cuts out a biological sibling in favor of a niece who—" Marvin raised a single hand. The gesture was small, but it stopped Grant mid-sentence. "Mr. Weller," Marvin said, his tone icy, "before you embarrass yourself further with threats of litigation you cannot afford, I suggest you listen to the rest of the documentation. Elliot Sawyer was evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists in the month prior to his death. His mental competency is a matter of video record." Marvin reached into his file and pulled out a document I had seen only once before. It was yellowed with age, the paper slightly brittle. "As for the claim of family rights," Marvin said, looking directly at Paula, "we have this." He slid the document across the table. It stopped directly in front of my mother. She looked down. I watched her eyes scan the header. It was the transfer of guardianship form she had signed 18 years ago. The paper that had traded me for my uncle's silence. "This is a standard guardianship transfer," Marvin explained. "Dated November 4th, 2007. Note the paragraph above your signature. Ms. Sawyer." Paula read it. I saw her throat work as she swallowed. "It states," Marvin quoted from his own copy, "that Paula Sawyer voluntarily relinquishes all parental rights and financial responsibility for the minor, Morgan Allen, citing an inability and unwillingness to provide care. It further states that she acknowledges this transfer is permanent and irrevocable." Paula looked up, her eyes wide and wet with performative tears. "I didn't know what I was signing," she cried. Her voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. "I was young. I was overwhelmed. Elliot pressured me. He told me it was just temporary, just until I got back on my feet. I didn't read the fine print. I trusted my brother." Marvin raised an eyebrow. "You didn't read it?" he asked skeptically. "No." Paula insisted. "It was late. We were in that awful notary office behind the gas station, the one with the flickering light. I was crying. I just signed where he told me to sign." The room went dead silent. Marvin smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Thank you for confirming that, Ms. Sawyer," Marvin said softly. "You just stated that you remember the specific location, the notary behind the gas station, and the condition of the lighting. That contradicts your claim from a moment ago that you were too overwhelmed to understand the context. You remember the event vividly, which means you were lucid." Paula's mouth opened, then closed. She realized she had walked into a snare. She had provided the very proof of competency she was trying to deny. Grant glared at her, then turned back to Marvin. "Ancient history," he spat. "That doesn't change the fact that she is the next of kin. You can't cut her out completely without cause." Marvin reached for the second envelope, the one with the red wax seal that had been broken in the opening moments of the meeting. This was the conditional addendum, the document Elliot had written while his body was failing but his mind was sharpening. "This brings us to the conditional addendum," Marvin said. As I stated earlier, this document was triggered by your presence here today. Elliot anticipated that you would claim poverty, or family obligation, or ignorance. Marvin unfolded the document. The instructions are specific. Marvin said, Elliot has authorized a singular settlement offer. Grant sat up straighter. The word settlement was the only thing he wanted to hear. He was already calculating his cut. The estate will pay Paula Sawyer the sum of $50,000. Marvin read. $50,000? Grant blurted out. That is an insult. That is lunch money relative to the valuation of this estate. There are conditions. Marvin continued, ignoring him. To receive this sum, Paula Sawyer must sign a sworn affidavit admitting to the abandonment of her daughter in 2007. Furthermore, she must acknowledge the attempt to secure a fraudulent loan in Elliot Sawyer's name 7 years ago, and agree to repay the principal of that loan from the settlement funds. Paula went white. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. The loan, Marvin said, his voice devoid of pity, was for $22,000. Elliot paid it off to keep you out of federal prison. He kept the records. If you accept the settlement, you repay the estate. That leaves you with a net payout of $28,000. Grant looked at Paula. You committed wire fraud. She didn't look at him. She was staring at Marvin with pure hatred. I won't sign that, she hissed. I won't admit to things I didn't do. That is blackmail. It is documentation. Marvin corrected. And those are the terms. Take it or leave it. We leave it. Grant slammed his hand on the table again. We will see you in court. We will contest the entire will. We will drag this girl and her dead uncle through the mud until you pay us what we are worth. I looked at Grant. He looked so confident. He thought this was a standard negotiation. He thought he could bully us into a higher number because we would want to avoid a scandal. He didn't know that Elliot didn't fear scandal. Elliot feared only one thing: incompetence. And leaving his company to people like this would have been the ultimate incompetence. Marvin sighed. He looked tired of them. He turned the page of the addendum. I was afraid you would say that, Marvin said. Which brings us to the final clause. The poison pill. Grant scoffed. There is no such thing in probate law. Marvin looked over the rim of his glasses. Elliot Sawyer established a dormant charitable entity known as the Sawyer Foundation for Homeless Youth. Marvin said, the bylaws of this foundation are integrated into the estate plan. He paused to let the words sink in. The clause reads as follows. In the event that Paula Sawyer, or any agent acting on her behalf, files a formal legal contest to this will, the following asset liquidation protocol is automatically executed. I watched my mother's face. She was listening now, really listening. Upon the filing of a contest, Marvin read, the controlling shares of Black Harbor Defense Group will be placed into a blind trust for immediate sale. The proceeds, along with all liquid assets, real estate, and personal property, will be irrevocably transferred to the Sawyer Foundation. Grant froze. What does that mean? He whispered. It means, Marvin said, closing the folder, that if you sue, Morgan gets nothing. You get nothing. The lawyers get nothing. Every single dollar goes to building shelters for teenagers who were kicked out of their homes. The silence was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and final. Elliot designed it this way, Marvin added. He knew you would assume Morgan was the weak link. He knew you would try to pressure her into a settlement to save her inheritance. So he removed the incentive. You cannot threaten to take the money from her, because if you fight, the money destroys itself. I looked at my mother. She was trembling. She looked at the polished table, then at the lawyer, and finally, she turned to me. The mask was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a desperate, grasping hunger. Morgan, she said. Her voice was low, frantic. You can't let him do this. I said nothing. I just watched her. He is dead. Morgan, she pleaded. He can't control us anymore. We can fix this. We can make a deal right now. Just us. You don't want to lose everything, do you? You don't want to lose the company. She reached out, her hand hovering over the table, trembling. You won't let him take everything from us again, she whispered. And there it was, us. She still thought we were a unit. She still thought that I was the scared 16-year-old girl who would do anything to keep the peace. She thought that I was the negotiable part of the equation. She thought that I loved the money more than I hated the betrayal. She didn't realize that I wasn't protecting the money. I was protecting the legacy. I looked at her hand, the hand that had packed a suitcase while I was at work, the hand that had written a note on an electric bill, the hand that had tried to steal from the only man who had ever saved me. I looked up into her eyes. I am not the one contesting the will. Mom, I said calmly. Grant stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is a bluff. No one burns $40 million. Marvin looked at me. He was waiting for my signal. He needed to know if I was going to fold, if I was going to beg them not to do it. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I picked up my purse. The reading is concluded. I said to Marvin, "Send me the transcript." I turned to walk out. Morgan, my mother, screamed. She scrambled up, knocking her chair over. "Don't you walk away from me if we file that contest. You lose everything." "Do you hear me? Everything." I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. "Then you have a choice to make," I said. I walked out of the conference room and into the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. I heard Grant shouting behind the soundproof glass. I heard my mother crying, but I didn't stop. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. I knew they wouldn't sign the settlement. Their greed was too big for $28,000. They were going to test the fence. They were going to try to call the bluff, and I was going to let them. The fallout from the reading was not an explosion. It was a siege. For the first 48 hours, the silence from my mother and Grant was absolute. I knew better than to mistake it for surrender. They were regrouping. They were assessing the structural integrity of the walls Elliot had built, looking for a loose brick, a rusted hinge, anything they could leverage to pry the vault open. The first volley arrived on a Thursday morning in the form of a courier packet. It was not a lawsuit. It was a letter from a mid-tier law firm in Boston, printed on heavy, cream-colored bond paper. The language was polite, couched in the soft, poisonous euphemisms of corporate extortion. They suggested an amicable renegotiation of the estate's distribution. They claimed that my mother was in a fragile emotional state and that the guardianship document from 18 years ago was signed under duress. They hinted, with maddening vagueness, that a public legal battle would be regrettable for the reputation of a defense contractor. They were fishing for fear. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to cut a check for $1 million just to make them go away. I shredded the letter. I did not reply. Elliot had taught me that silence is the loudest answer you can give to a threat, but the silence didn't last. By Friday, my personal phone began to light up. The calls came from blocked numbers. Bypassing the initial filters I had set up, I let them go to voicemail, archiving every single one. The recordings were a masterclass in manipulation. "Morgan, it's Mom." The first one began, her voice thick with tears. "Please pick up. I just want to talk. Grant is so angry, but I told him we can work this out. I just want my daughter back." 2 hours later, the tone shifted. "You are being cruel. Morgan, just like him, do you know what it feels like to be erased by your own family? You are stealing from me. That money is mine." By midnight, the pretense of love had evaporated entirely. "You think you are so smart," she hissed into the receiver. "You think a piece of paper protects you? You are a little girl playing dress-up in a dead man's suit. Call me back, or I will make sure everyone knows what kind of monster Elliot really was." I saved the files to an encrypted server. I backed them up in 3 locations. I didn't feel the sting of her words anymore. I only felt the cold satisfaction of gathering evidence. Then, the battlefield expanded. On Saturday, my communications director, a sharp woman named Sarah, flagged a series of posts on a popular social media platform. My mother had not used my name, nor Elliot's. She was too careful for that. Instead, she had posted a long, rambling narrative about children stolen by rich men and the agony of a mother silenced by wealth. It was vague enough to avoid a libel suit, but specific enough to garner sympathy. The comments section was filled with strangers offering support, condemning the nameless tyrant uncle and the brainwashed daughter. She was shaping a narrative. She was building a public persona of the victim, preparing the ground for a jury that might one day look at her with pity rather than disgust. I told Sarah to monitor it but not to engage. Let her talk. I said, "She is digging a hole. We just need to wait until she falls in." But on Monday, the war crossed the red line. It moved from my personal life into Black Harbor. I arrived at the office to find the head of client relations waiting by my desk. He looked pale. "We have a problem," he said. Closing the door, 3 of our Tier 1 clients received emails this morning. Anonymous tips. What kind of tips, I asked. Booting up my terminal. Allegations of fraud, he said. Claims that Elliot coerced you into the succession. Claims that the company's liquidity is built on shell games. And worse, allegations that we are leaking data to foreign entities. My stomach dropped. This was not just harassment. This was corporate sabotage. In the defense industry, trust is the currency. If our clients believed, even for a second, that our integrity was compromised, contracts would be paused, audits would be triggered, the stock price would bleed. "Grant," I whispered. This had Grant's fingerprints all over it. It was sloppy, aggressive, and designed to cause maximum chaos. "Get me the security team," I ordered, now. We spent the next 6 hours in the server room. The emails had been routed through a complex chain of proxies, bouncing from servers in Estonia to Panama before landing in our clients' inboxes. To the untrained eye, they were untraceable. But Black Harbor did not employ untrained eyes. We stripped the headers of the emails down to the raw metadata. We analyzed the packet timing. We found a recurring digital signature, a tiny anomaly in the routing protocol that pointed to a specific service provider. It wasn't a master hacker. It was a reputation management firm based in a strip mall in New Jersey. A firm that specialized in scrubbing bad reviews for restaurants and planting dirt on ex-spouses. We subpoenaed the payment records for the firm's recent transactions. It didn't take a court order. We just cross-referenced the transaction IDs with public ledger data. The job had been paid for using prepaid Visa cards purchased at a grocery store in Ravenport. Grant was trying to destroy a multi-million-dollar defense firm with a reloadable debit card. It was pathetic, but it was also dangerous. I need a smoking gun. I told my lead security officer, a man named Marcus, who had served in naval intelligence, this links them to the harassment, but it doesn't prove they are trying to breach our systems. I need proof of intrusion. Marcus looked at me. "You want to set a trap?" I nodded. "I want to run a canary." A canary trap is a classic counterintelligence maneuver. You release different versions of sensitive information to different suspects and wait to see which version leaks. But in this case, we didn't need multiple versions. We just needed one irresistibly juicy piece of bait. We created a document. It was a PDF, stamped with watermarks that said, "Confidential and Draft." The title was Executive Compensation Restructuring and Emergency Settlement Fund. The content of the document was entirely fiction. It detailed a plan for me to liquidate $5 million of company assets to create a silent settlement fund to pay off family members to avoid a scandal. It was exactly what Grant and my mother were praying for. It confirmed their bias. It told them that I was weak, that I was scared, and that I was preparing to pay them. But the document was not just text. Embedded in the white space, invisible to the human eye, was a pixel beacon, a tiny piece of code that would ping our servers the moment the file was opened. And deeper in the metadata, we hid a canary token that would record the IP address, device type, and geolocation of anyone who viewed it. We didn't email it to them. That would be entrapment. Instead, we placed it on a forgotten staging server that we knew had a weak password, a server we had seen their hired hackers pinging days earlier. We left the digital back door unlocked, and we put the cheese on the floor. Then, we waited. It took less than 12 hours. At 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the security system. Alert. Canary token triggered. I opened the log. The document had been downloaded. The access IP was not in Estonia. It was not in Panama. It was a residential IP address registered to a townhouse complex in Ravenport. The device was a MacBook Pro. The user account name was registered to Grant Weller. They hadn't just hired a firm. Grant had gotten greedy. He had used the credentials the hackers provided to look for the payload himself. He wanted to see the money with his own eyes. I smiled in the dark. Got you. The next morning, the leak happened exactly as predicted. A screenshot of the fake document appeared on an industry gossip blog, accompanied by a salacious article about Black Harbor CEO planning secret payoff. They had taken the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. I walked into the legal department at 8 o'clock sharp. Draft the motion. I told the general counsel, we are filing for a protective order. Based on what grounds, he asked. Harassment. I said. Defamation. And thanks to last night, violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, we have proof of unauthorized access to proprietary company data. We went to court that afternoon. The judge, a stern woman who had no patience for family drama, looked at the stack of evidence. She looked at the transcripts of the voicemails. She looked at the forensic report linking Grant's laptop to the stolen document. This is not a dispute, the judge said, peering over her glasses at the empty defense table. We hadn't notified them, as was our right for an emergency temporary order. This is a siege. She granted the order immediately. It was comprehensive. Paula Sawyer and Grant Weller were prohibited from contacting me. Black Harbor employees, or any affiliates. They were barred from posting about the company online. And physically, they were required to stay at least 500 yards away from my home and my office at all times. I had the order served by a sheriff's deputy within the hour. I thought that would be the end of the skirmish. I thought the legal wall would force them to retreat. But I had underestimated the desperation of a woman who felt she was owed the world. Paula didn't stop. She escalated. She interpreted the restraining order not as a legal boundary, but as a challenge. She saw it as me playing hard to get. In her twisted logic, the harder I pushed back, the more it proved that I was hiding something, that I was afraid of her power. 2 days later, the amicable letters stopped. The social media posts stopped, likely because her lawyer warned her she was risking jail time. But the pressure shifted to the physical realm. It started with drive-bys. My security detail reported a gray sedan driving slowly past the entrance to the Black Harbor campus. They never stopped, never got out. They just lingered, watching the glass tower. Then, it came to my home. I was sitting in the living room, the same room where Elliot had taught me how to read a balance sheet. It was late, past 11. The house was dark, save for the glow of my laptop. The perimeter alert chimed softly. I pulled up the camera feed on my tablet. A car was sitting at the main gate. It wasn't turning around. It wasn't a delivery driver lost in the dark. It was sitting there, idling. The headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the iron bars of the gate. I zoomed in. I couldn't see the faces inside, but I knew the car. It was the same sedan Grant had driven to the reading. They were just sitting there, watching. It was a slow, deliberate act of intimidation. They were rehearsing ownership. They were looking at the house, at the long driveway, at the walls that protected me. And they were telling themselves that it was only a matter of time before they broke in. My hand hovered over the button to call the police. I could have them arrested right then. Violation of a protective order. It was a slam dunk. But I didn't press it. Not yet. Arresting them for sitting at a gate was too small. It was a misdemeanor. They would be out on bail in 4 hours. Angrier and more reckless. I needed them to commit. I needed them to make the mistake that would bury them forever. I watched the screen. The car sat there for 10 minutes. Then, slowly, the reverse lights came on. They backed up and drove away into the night. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking. Just a little. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. You want the house, I whispered to the empty room. Come and take it. I knew they would be back, and I knew that next time, they wouldn't stop at the gate. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the animal to step into the cage. The breach happened on a Tuesday afternoon, under the guise of a mundane delivery. I was in my home office, reviewing the quarterly projections for the Asian markets, when the gate alert chimed on my primary monitor. A delivery truck from a local catering company was buzzing in. I had ordered lunch for a strategy meeting with my senior staff scheduled at the house. The heavy iron gates swung open, slow and majestic. The truck rumbled through, but as the gates began their automatic closure cycle, a gray sedan surged forward from the blind spot of the hedge. It was an aggressive, dangerous maneuver. The driver gunned the engine, slipping the nose of the car into the gap just before the magnetic locks could engage. the sensors. Detecting an obstruction, safety reversed the gates. The sedan shot through and accelerated up the long, winding driveway. I did not panic. Panic is a reaction to the unexpected, and I had been expecting this since the moment I walked out of the lawyer's office. I watched the screen with a detached, clinical interest. It was Grant driving. Paula was in the passenger seat. As they approached the main house, I saw my mother check her reflection in the visor mirror. She smoothed her hair. She applied a fresh coat of lipstick. She looked like she was arriving for a tea party, not a felony. I picked up my phone. I did not dial 911 immediately. I dialed the private line of the Ravenport Chief of Police, a man who had respected my uncle for 30 years. They are on the property. I said simply, "Execute the response protocol." Then I stood up, walked to the hallway, and picked up the tablet that controlled the smart home system. I checked the camera angles. Every inch of the driveway, the porch, and the front lawn was covered. I tapped a button to ensure the cloud upload was active. I stepped out onto the front porch just as the sedan screeched to a halt on the gravel. The doors flew open. Grant stepped out first, adjusting his suit jacket, trying to summon an air of authority that evaporated the moment his feet hit the ground. My mother followed. She was wearing a white dress, something soft and maternal, chosen specifically to disarm me. She walked toward the steps with her arms open, a wide, forgiving smile plastered on her face. "Morgan," she called out, her voice pitching up into that theatrical register she used when she wanted something. "We need to stop this silliness. We are here to bring you home." I stood at the top of the stone steps. I did not move. I did not smile. I held the tablet in my left hand, the screen facing me. "You are in violation of a court order," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the quiet afternoon air, it carried like a bell. Paula laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, dismissive and condescending. "Oh, stop it. Sweetheart," she said, continuing to advance. "You can't have a restraining order against your own mother. That is just paper. We are family. We are going to come inside, have a nice talk, and fix this mess Elliot left us." I watched her cross the invisible line. The protective order issued by Judge Holloway mandates a minimum distance of 500 yards. I stated, reciting the facts. "You are currently 30 yards from my front door. You are trespassing." Grant marched forward, puffing out his chest. "Listen here, young lady. We are done playing games. You are manipulating the situation. We have rights. We are here to inspect the property as potential heirs." I held up the tablet. I turned the screen so they could see it. It displayed a live feed of their faces, clear and high definition. Beside the video was a running timestamp and a red indicator that read, "Recording." Below that was a digital map showing their GPS location well inside the red zone of the exclusion perimeter. "Everything you say and do is being live-streamed to an off-site server." I said, "It is also being mirrored to the dispatch consoles of the Ravenport Police Department." My mother stopped. The smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching. She looked at the screen, then at the camera mounted above the door, then back at me. "You are filming us?" she asked, sounding genuinely hurt. "I am documenting a crime." I corrected. "Turn it off," Grant shouted, lunging toward the steps. "You do not have my permission to record me." I didn't flinch. "You are on private property in the commission of a felony harassment violation. You have no expectation of privacy here." Grant stopped 3 steps below me. He looked ready to grab me, but the cold, unblinking eye of the camera held him back. He knew that if he touched me, if he even raised a hand, his settlement leverage would vanish instantly. Paula tried a different tactic. The tears started. They were impressive, instantaneous, and copious. "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed, clasping her hands together. "I changed your diapers. I fed you. I sacrificed everything for you. And now you treat me like a criminal. I just want to save you. Morgan, Grant and we just want to make sure you are safe." I looked at the woman who had left me with a jar of pickles and an eviction notice. I looked for any spark of genuine emotion, any hint that she actually saw me as a person. I saw nothing. I saw an actress struggling because she had forgotten her lines. "You are not here for me," I said. "You are here because the bank called. You are here because you realize the settlement offer expires in 48 hours. Paula's face hardened. The tears stopped, as if she had turned off a faucet. "It is our money," she hissed. Sirens cut through the air. They were close, very close. The chief had stationed a patrol car at the bottom of the hill, anticipating exactly this kind of escalation. Grant spun around. 2 police cruisers roared up the driveway, lights flashing, gravel spraying as they braked hard behind the sedan. 4 officers stepped out, hands resting on their holsters. Grant threw his hands up. "This is a misunderstanding. We are invited guests." I walked down 1 step. "They are not guests." I told the lead officer, "They are in violation of Order 794. I want them removed and cited." My mother turned to the police, launching into her narrative. "Officer, thank God you are here. My daughter is being held captive in this house. She is confused. We are just trying to help her. She needs medical attention." The officer, a veteran sergeant named Miller, didn't even blink. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a copy of the protective order. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Miller said. "What?" Paula shrieked. "You can't arrest me. I am Paula Sawyer. This is my brother's house." "It is Ms. Allen's house," Miller said, spinning her around, "and you are under arrest for criminal trespass and violation of a protective order." The scene that followed was pathetic. Grant tried to use his physical size to intimidate the officers and ended up face down on the hood of his own car. Cuffed and read his rights. Paula screamed, cried, threatened to sue the department, and then, when the handcuffs clicked shut, slumped into a heap of victimhood, wailing that her child had turned against her. I stood on the porch and watched. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I just felt a profound sense of exhaustion. It was like watching a demolition crew finally take down a building that had been condemned for years. It was ugly, but it was necessary. By evening, the incident was headline news. Black Harbor was the largest employer in the region. The arrest of the founder's sister on the founder's estate was irresistible to the local press. The mugshots were online within 2 hours. My mother looked disheveled and furious. Grant looked stunned. The narrative war began immediately. My mother, using her 1 phone call to contact a tabloid reporter she had been grooming, spun a tale of woe. She claimed she was a grieving sister who had been barred from her brother's funeral, a mother who had been erased by a niece greedy for inheritance. Comments started to pour in online. "How could a daughter do that? Money changes people. She is a monster." I watched the public sentiment turn against me. It was predictable. People love an underdog, and a crying mother in handcuffs looks like an underdog. I called Marvin Klein. "Release the receipts." I said. "All of them?" Marvin asked. "No." I said. "We do not flood the zone. We use surgical strikes. Release the police report from 16 years ago, the one where the landlord reported an abandoned minor, and release the guardianship transfer." Marvin hesitated. "That is private family history." Morgan, "Once it is out, you can't put it back. It stopped being private when she trespassed on my property." I said, "Kill the lie." Marvin, "Before it takes root." The next morning, the narrative collapsed. The local paper ran the documents on the front page. There was no editorializing needed. The dry, bureaucratic language of the police report from my 16th year was devastating. Subject found alone in apartment, no food, utilities scheduled for disconnect, mother's whereabouts unknown, then the guardianship paper, I, Paula Sawyer, relinquish all rights. The poor, misunderstood mother's story disintegrated upon contact with the truth. The public sympathy evaporated, replaced by shock and judgment. The internet, fickle as always, turned on her. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a pariah. But the corporate damage was harder to contain. Black Harbor's stock took a hit, not a crash, but a wobble. Investors hate drama. They hate seeing their CEO in the police blotter section. I received calls from 3 board members suggesting that perhaps I should take a leave of absence until the family matter was resolved. I refused. I called an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium of the Black Harbor headquarters. I stood on the stage, alone, without notes. I looked out at the 500 employees who were whispering, wondering if the company was about to implode. I did not apologize. Elliot had taught me that apologies are admissions of guilt. "You have seen the news," I said, my voice amplified through the hall. You are worried about stability. You are worried that my focus is divided. I paused. My uncle built this company on the principle of verifiable truth. I continued, in our code, in our contracts, and in our leadership. What you are seeing in the press is the result of a security system working exactly as designed. A threat was identified. A perimeter was established. The threat was neutralized. I looked around the room. If I can protect my home from a breach, I can protect this company. The personal matter is being handled by the courts. The operational matter is being handled by me. We closed the Trident contract yesterday. We are up 12% in the European sector. The work continues. I walked off the stage. The applause started slowly, then built. It wasn't raucous cheering. It was the steady, rhythmic clapping of people who felt reassured. The stock price stabilized by closing bell, but the beast was not dead. 2 days later, my mother was released on bail. She had no money, no public support, and a criminal record pending. She was cornered. And a cornered animal has only one option left. I received a call from Marvin. She filed. He said, I closed my eyes. She filed, what a formal contest of the will. Marvin said, her lawyer just submitted the paperwork to the probate court. She is claiming that the poison pill clause is unenforceable and contrary to public policy. She is claiming you coerced Elliot into adding it. She knows what this means, I asked. She knows that by filing, she triggers the liquidation. She doesn't believe you will do it. Marvin said, she is betting that you love the money too much. She thinks that the moment the judge schedules the hearing, you will call her and offer her $5 million to drop the suit. She thinks it is a game of chicken. I sat in my office, looking at the city skyline. I thought about the $40 million. I thought about the house. I thought about the power and the security that Elliot had given me. My mother was gambling everything on the idea that I was greedy. She was projecting her own weakness onto me. She couldn't conceive of a world where someone would choose principle over profit. She wants me to beg. I said, she expects you to beg. Marvin corrected, I don't beg. I said, Morgan. Marvin said, his voice serious. If we go to this hearing, and if the judge upholds the clause, the liquidation is automatic. You lose the company. You lose the controlling shares. It all goes to the foundation. I know. I said, I thought about Elliot. I thought about his last words. She will come for the money, not you. He had built the poison pill not to save the money, but to save me. He knew that as long as the money was on the table, she would never stop hunting me. The only way to be free was to let the money burn. Prepare the defense. I told Marvin, we are fighting the contest, no. I said, we are enforcing the clause. She wants a showdown. She gets one. Let the court see who is bluffing. I hung up the phone. I felt a strange lightness. The fear was gone. The dread was gone. All that was left was the clarity of the endgame. I wasn't going to negotiate. I wasn't going to settle. I was going to walk into that courtroom and pull the trigger on the bomb Elliot had built. And I was going to watch my mother realize, too late, that she had blown up the only bridge she had left. The real power wasn't the millions. The real power was the ability to say no, without flinching, and I was finally ready to say it. The probate court in Ravenport smelled of floor wax and old paper. It was a smell I associated with bureaucracy and boredom. But today, the air was thick with a static tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. I sat at the defendant's table next to Marvin Klein, on the other side of the aisle. My mother sat with a court-appointed attorney, having burned through her retainer with the previous firm. She wore a modest gray suit, clearly purchased for the occasion, and she held a handkerchief that she dabbed at dry eyes whenever the judge looked in her direction. She looked confident, even now, after the arrest, after the public humiliation. She believed she was going to win. She was banking on the one thing she thought was universal greed. She believed that I would never let the judge strike the gavel that would vaporize $40 million. She thought I was waiting for the last second to slide a settlement check across the aisle just to save the fortune. She did not understand that I had already made my peace with the fire. The hearing began at 9 o'clock in the morning. Judge Holloway, the same stern woman who had granted the protective order, presided. She looked at the file before her with an expression of deep fatigue. Ms. Sawyer, the judge began, looking over her spectacles. You have filed a formal contest against the will of your late brother, Elliot Sawyer. You are alleging that the poison pill clause, which mandates the liquidation of the estate into a charitable trust upon any legal challenge, is punitive and invalid. My mother stood up. Her voice was shaky, a perfectly rehearsed tremor. Yes, Your Honor, she said. My brother was not well. He was paranoid. He was manipulated by certain parties who wanted to keep me away. I am his sister. I am his blood. It is against the natural order for him to leave everything to a charity that didn't even exist until a month ago, just to spite me. I am only asking for my fair share. Her lawyer jumped in, arguing about family entitlement and undue influence. He painted a picture of Elliot as a confused old man and me as the opportunistic niece who had whispered poison in his ear. Marvin Klein did not object. He did not interrupt. He sat like a stone statue until it was his turn to speak. When he finally stood, he did not offer an emotional rebuttal. He offered a timeline. Your Honor, Marvin said, his voice filling the room. The plaintiff speaks of family entitlement. The defense would like to introduce into evidence the timeline of events that led to this clause. Marvin submitted the documents. The judge flipped through them. Exhibit A. Marvin stated, the police report from 18 years ago, documenting the abandonment of the minor. Morgan Allen. Exhibit B. The guardianship transfer signed by the plaintiff. Relinquishing all care. Exhibit C. The notarized affidavit of a loan application made 7 years ago, in which the plaintiff attempted to borrow $22,000 using the deceased's identity, a federal crime that the deceased paid to cover up. My mother stiffened. She had thought the loan was a secret. She didn't know Elliot had kept the paperwork. The judge looked up from the file, her eyes narrowing. This is a pattern, Marvin continued. Abandonment, coercion, fraud, and now, harassment. He signaled to the bailiff to bring up the next piece of evidence. It was the digital forensic report from the canary trap we had executed at Black Harbor. Exhibit D, Marvin said. Proof that the plaintiff and her partner, Mr. Grant Weller, utilized illegal means to access proprietary company data in an attempt to blackmail the current CEO. They downloaded a fake document, planted by our security team, which they believed contained a settlement offer. This proves that their motivation is not grief, nor family reunification. It is financial predation. The judge looked at the tracking logs. She looked at the time-stamped photos of my mother sitting in the car at my gate, violating the protective order. The narrative my mother had built, the sad, excluded sister, crumbled under the weight of the data. It was not a tragic story. It was a heist. Paula looked at me. Her eyes were wide, panic starting to set in. She realized the sympathy play wasn't working. But, she stammered, addressing the judge directly. That clause. He can't just burn the money. It is $40 million. It belongs to the family. Judge Holloway closed the file. She folded her hands and looked at my mother with a gaze that could have frozen water. Ms. Sawyer, the judge said, her voice quiet and lethal. In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen many disputes, but I have rarely seen a plaintiff come to this court with hands this unclean. You argue that the poison pill clause is punitive. I find that it is protective. The judge picked up her gavel. Your brother anticipated your greed. The judge continued. He knew that if there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, you would never stop hunting his niece, so he removed the pot of gold. He gave you a choice. You could have walked away with a small settlement. Instead, you chose to fight. You pulled the trigger. My mother stood up, knocking her chair back. No. You can't, Morgan. Tell her. Tell her to stop. I remained seated. I looked at my mother, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no fear, just the finality of a door clicking shut. The court finds the will valid. Judge Holloway ruled. The court further finds that by filing this contest, the plaintiff has triggered Article 6 of the estate plan. The condition has been met. The gavel banged down. It sounded like a gunshot. I hereby order the immediate liquidation of the estate of Elliot Sawyer, the judge declared. All assets, including the controlling interest in Black Harbor Defense Group, serve to be transferred to the Sawyer Foundation for Homeless Youth. The plaintiff is awarded nothing. The case is dismissed. The silence that followed was total. My mother stood frozen. She looked at me. Her mouth open in a silent scream. She realized, in that split second, what she had done. She hadn't just lost the lawsuit. She had incinerated $40 million. She had burned her own leverage permanently, in public, on the court record. She lunged toward me, but the bailiff stepped in between us. "You stupid girl," she screamed, her face twisted and ugly. "You let him take it. You have nothing now. You are just as poor as I am." I stood up then. I picked up my briefcase. "I am not poor. Mom," I said calmly, "I have a job, I have a home, and I have the truth." I walked past her. She was still screaming as the bailiff escorted her out, but her voice sounded small and distant, like a ghost fading away. I drove back to the estate alone. The house was quiet. The staff had left for the day. It was just me and the ocean and the empty rooms. I walked into Elliot's office. It was time. I took the flash drive from the safe, the one labeled "Play Only" after the reading. I plugged it into his laptop. Elliot's face filled the screen. He looked sick, frail, the cancer eating him alive, but his eyes were sharp. He was sitting in this very chair, wearing his favorite suit. "Morgan," the video Elliot said, "if you are watching this, it means she did it. It means she filed." He paused, taking a breath that rattled in his chest. "Do not mourn the money," he said. "Money is just fuel. If it sits in a tank, it is useless. If it burns, it moves things." He leaned into the camera. "I didn't leave you the inheritance to make you safe," he said. "Safety is an illusion. I left you the system so you would never be cornered again. I wanted you to learn how to build, how to fight, and how to walk away. The money was the final lesson. It was the weight you had to drop to run free." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened the hard angles of his face. "You are the CEO of Black Harbor now. Not because you own the shares, but because the board knows you are the only one who can run it. You earned that. No one gave it to you. And now, the foundation. That is your legacy. You take that money and you use it to make sure that no 16-year-old girl ever has to sit on a curb waiting for a mother who isn't coming." The video ended. The screen went black. I sat there for a long time as the sun went down. I wasn't crying. I was smiling. He was right. I had lost the billions on paper, but I had gained something far more dangerous to people like my mother. I had gained autonomy. The next day, the liquidation began. It was swift and brutal. The mansion was listed. The stocks were sold. The check that was cut to the Sawyer Foundation was staggering. I didn't keep a dime of the estate, but I kept my position. The board of Black Harbor, impressed by my handling of the crisis and the poison pill strategy, voted unanimously to keep me on as CEO with a standard salary. I didn't need the inheritance. I had the skill. I took over the directorship of the foundation. My act of sweet revenge was not to destroy my mother, but to save everyone else. I set up a scholarship fund in Elliot's name. I bought 3 apartment buildings in the city and converted them into emergency housing for teens. Every time I signed a check to help a kid buy groceries or pay rent, I thought of my mother. I thought of how much she wanted this money, and how much she hated that it was being used to help runaways. Her greed had funded her own nightmare. My mother left town a month later. Grant left her when the money didn't materialize. She moved to a small apartment in Ohio, sending me letters occasionally that I never opened. The story ends on a Tuesday night, 6 months later. I am in my new house, a smaller place, one I bought with my own salary. It is not a fortress on a cliff. It is a home with warm lights and a garden. I walk to the front door, outside. The night is dark, but the darkness doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels like potential. I lock the deadbolt. Click. It is a solid mechanical sound. I am not locking the world out because I am afraid. I am locking it out because I am at peace. The girl who was left at 16, who waited for a savior, is gone. In her place is a woman who learned that the only way to win the game is to be willing to flip the table. I turn off the hall light and walk up the stairs. The future is quiet, and for the first time in my life, it belongs entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate payback. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your office, or maybe relaxing at home. Please drop a comment below to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.